Welcome to RealFear Files. Tonight, we journey deep into Appalachia, where the mountains hold secrets and the hollers remember every whisper. These are not simple ghost tales. They are 9 real, spine-chilling stories from those who dared to explore abandoned towns, hidden roads, and forgotten neighborhoods, only to encounter the unimaginable. Each account comes from first-hand experiences, police reports, and encounters that defy explanation. From shadowy figures in empty houses to discoveries that sparked criminal investigations, these 9 stories will take you to the edge of fear itself. Names and locations have been changed to protect identities, but the terror is very real. Subscribe to RealFear Files and turn on notifications, because these 9 encounters from Appalachia will haunt your thoughts long after the screen goes dark. Jack had always been pulled toward the forgotten corners of the world. The kind of spots in Appalachia where towns had just dissolved into the forest, leaving only echoes behind. He was 26 when he finally made the trip to a crumbling coal town deep in eastern Kentucky. Locals called it Black Ridge Hollow. Back in the 40s and 50s, this place had thrived. Coal was king, and men trudged down into the mines every morning, lunch buckets swinging, lamps on their helmets, faces streaked with dirt. But when the mine shut down in '73, the company vanished as fast as it came, leaving behind neat rows of wooden homes that had once held entire families. Now, more than 50 years later, only 3 houses showed any sign of life, and even those barely clung to existence. Jack had done his homework before heading up the winding mountain roads. Old newspapers mentioned Black Ridge Hollow in passing, usually tied to the mine collapse that killed 17 men and led to the shutdown. Census records told the story of a town bleeding life. 842 souls in 1970, down to 63 by 1980, and by 2000, barely a handful remained. Satellite images painted a ghost town trapped in decay. Sagging roofs, vines creeping over every corner, nature slowly swallowing the work of human hands. It was the kind of place that made Jack's skin tingle, where history felt thick in the air, like dust that refused to settle. He rolled into Black Ridge one gray October morning. Fog hung low, curling around the hollows like some living thing. The road was cracked, weeds cracking through asphalt, the trees tightening around him with every mile. When the forest finally thinned, he pulled up to what remained of the town. 2 rows of houses faced each other across a muddy lane, maybe 20 in total. Most were shuttered with boards, windows dark, doors nailed tight. Paint peeled in jagged strips, exposing gray wood that looked like old bones. Porches had sagged or caved in. Chimneys leaned like tired old men. Only 3 homes at the far end seemed maintained, their yards cleared, smoke curling from one chimney. Jack parked near the entrance, grabbed his camera and flashlight, and stepped into silence. Not a sound but the distant caw of crows echoing through the trees. He moved methodically, shooting exterior shots first, taking note of which houses looked safe enough to enter. The first house he picked was the 4th on the left, its front door swinging loose on a single hinge. Inside, the air smelled of rot and mold. The floor felt solid enough beneath his boots. In the main room, remnants of old life lingered. A rusted potbelly stove sat in the corner. A calendar from 1974 clung to the wall, yellowed with age. A small toy truck lay on its side near the window. Jack snapped photos, his breath puffing in the icy air. Then he heard it. 3 sharp knocks, coming from deeper inside. His heart kicked. The sound echoed through the empty rooms. He froze, straining to listen. The knocks came from the back bedroom. "Hello?" he called. Nothing. Probably the house settling, maybe a stray animal. Jack moved toward the back, flashlight slicing through darkness. The bedroom was empty, save for a rusted bed frame and scattered belongings, including a stack of framed photos lying face down. He flipped one over. A family of 5 smiled back at him, father in mining clothes, mother in a faded floral dress, kids aged 5 to 12. All standing in front of this very house, time captured on film. He set the photo on the windowsill and knocked 3 times against the wall. 3 knocks answered him from the opposite side. Skin prickled. 2 knocks? 2 came back. 4 rapid knocks? 4 replied. The rhythm matched perfectly. Jack tried logic. Maybe someone in the next house was playing games. He left the bedroom and went to the neighbor's home, sealed tight. Windows and doors nailed shut. He knocked on the outer wall. Nothing. Harder. Still nothing. Back to the first house. Stepping through the door, 3 knocks greeted him immediately, coming from the bedroom. His flashlight trembled in his hand. The photo he'd set on the sill now leaned against the wall, face out. He hadn't moved it. Jack picked it up again and noticed something missed before. In the background, a faint pale shape appeared in the window. Maybe a face, hard to tell, worn by time. He placed the photo back and spoke into the empty room. "Is anyone here?" 1 knock. He swallowed hard. "Are you trying to communicate?" 1 knock. Rational thought wrestled with the impossible. "Can you answer questions? Yes?" 1 knock. Silence stretched. "Are you dangerous?" 2 knocks. Maybe a no. "Did you live here?" 1 knock. "Did you die here?" 1 sharp, loud knock that rattled the walls. The room grew colder. His breath turned to mist. Then the knocking moved. Not answering, just traveling. 3 from the bedroom wall, 3 from the doorway, 3 from the main room, marching toward the front. Jack stumbled backward, flashlight swinging wild. The sound reached the porch, then the next house. Sealed tight. Yet the knocking continued. Down the row, house by house, 3 sharp hits each. The crows went silent. Fog pressed closer. Jack bolted to his truck, mud slick under his boots. Behind him, the knocking marched onward, layering into a dozen fists pounding in rhythm. The past refusing to die. Jack's hands shook on the wheel as he tore down the muddy road, the truck tires spitting up wet leaves. The knocking didn't stop. It followed him like some relentless rhythm, hammering house after house, growing louder as he approached the main road. Every set of 3 knocks carried the weight of history, grief, and something darker. Something that refused to stay buried. He glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. Near the far end of the lane, an old man stood in the yard of one of the lived-in houses. He didn't wave, didn't call out, just raised one hand, not a greeting, but a warning, maybe even a plea. Jack's gut told him to stop, to figure out what the man meant, but instinct screamed louder. He kept driving, mud sliding under the tires, the fog curling around his truck like smoke. Once home, Jack forced himself to breathe. He tried to shake off the adrenaline, but even in his apartment, the echoes of the knocks lingered in his ears. 3, 3, 3. Each set as crisp as it had been back in Black Ridge Hollow. He pulled out his camera and started reviewing the photos. That's when he noticed details that had slipped past him in the moment. Every single image he'd taken inside that first house. The family photos that had been face down on the floor were now upright, lined up perfectly along the baseboard. He hadn't touched them. And in several shots, especially the bedroom, shadows lingered where no light source existed. Dark, human-like silhouettes, standing in corners, caught in doorways, watching him from angles that should have been empty. Jack didn't sleep that night. His mind kept replaying the October morning. The fog, the abandoned homes, the 3 knocks that followed him down the row. He tried to rationalize, to bury it under logic. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe the boards were shifting. Maybe he was imagining it. But deep down, he knew the truth. Some things aren't meant to be rationalized. Some things are meant to be feared. Days later, he dug deeper into the history of Black Ridge Hollow, desperate for answers. He found a newspaper article from November 1973 that made his stomach twist. It mentioned a fire that tore through part of the town shortly after the mine closed. Families were forced to leave their homes in a hurry. 6 people perished, trapped inside their burning houses. The official story blamed faulty wiring, but survivors insisted the fire started in multiple homes at the same time, a detail the company had buried, along with any investigation. Money had silenced the families. The rest of the town moved on, leaving ghosts behind. Jack never returned to Black Ridge Hollow. Every time he thought about it, he pictured the row of empty homes, the fog thick and alive, the 3 knocks that had followed him like a pulse of the past. Sometimes, late at night, he still hears them. 3 firm taps against his bedroom wall. He tells himself it's nothing. Just the house settling. Just his imagination. Just a memory replaying itself. But it's always 3. Always evenly spaced. And always waiting. Like a question he isn't meant to answer. Jack hasn't knocked back. He knows better now. Some doors, some conversations, aren't meant to be opened. Some things, once awakened, refuse to stay silent. The past isn't dead in Black Ridge Hollow. It's alive, moving through the walls, the fog, and the shadows. Waiting for the curious, the brave, and the foolish to answer the rhythm it keeps. And somewhere, deep in the mountains of Kentucky, the echoes of 17 miners and 6 fire victims still roam the rows of forgotten houses, knocking. They're patient. They remember. And they're still watching. Maya was 23 when she dove headfirst into documenting abandoned Appalachia, hauling along a decent camera, a backpack stuffed with water, and a curiosity that wouldn't quit. For almost 2 years, she'd wandered through forgotten towns and empty homesteads, snapping shots and posting them to a blog that a small circle of urban explorers followed religiously. Most trips were quiet, even boring. Creaking floorboards, broken windows, the occasional deer bolting through the brush. But the afternoon she drove down Copper Run Road in southwestern Virginia, everything she thought she knew about abandoned went out the window. Copper Run wasn't on most maps. Her GPS had thrown in the towel about 3 miles back, leaving her navigating by memory and a set of crumpled directions she'd scribbled from an old forum post. The post was brief, cryptic, and signed by someone called Truth Seeker 87. It warned of abandoned trailers and small houses along a dead-end road, remnants of a textile mill town that had shuttered in the early 90s. Cameras didn't work right there, the post claimed. Images came out twisted, weirdly warped. That was enough to hook Maya. She needed to see for herself if the stories were true or just another digital ghost tale. The road itself was a nightmare. Mud, gravel, potholes deep enough to flip a tire. Trees pressed in tight on both sides, branches overhead forming a ceiling that swallowed the late afternoon sun. Maya crept along in her little sedan, bouncing and rattling over rocks, until the forest finally spat her out into a clearing. Her breath caught. 6 trailers and 3 small houses were strewn across the clearing, no rhyme or reason to their placement. Decay had claimed everything. Windows shattered, doors hanging open like frozen screams, rust swallowing every exposed metal surface. Satellite dishes tilted crookedly on roofs. Poles sagged, wires drooping dangerously. Whoever had lived here had left in a hurry, or maybe had never left at all. She parked at the edge, slung the camera over her shoulder, and stepped into silence. Not just quiet, but a heavy, suffocating stillness that made her ears ring. No birds, no insects, not even wind. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath. Maya started with the first trailer on the left, a sagging double-wide with a blackened, burned porch. The door swung open at her push. Inside, mold and rot hit her nose like a punch. She pulled her bandana over her face and started photographing. Inside was oddly intact. Furniture still in place. Dishes stacked in the sink. A calendar on the wall, frozen on August 1993. In the back bedroom, toys lay scattered across the floor. Crayon drawings clung to the walls, faded stick families smiling up at her. One picture of a house had the faces scribbled out in thick black marker. Maya snapped a photo, a chill crawling down her spine despite the warm sun outside. Next, she moved to a small house with boarded windows. Some planks had been pried away, leaving gaps wide enough to climb through. The darkness inside was suffocating. She flicked on her flashlight, revealing a couch stained and chairs tipped over. Then her eyes locked on the walls, covered in writing. Black marker scrawled the same phrase over and over, in different sizes, jagged and frantic. Loop closes at the burned porch. Some of it looked new, bold and dark. Other lines were faded, smudged by time. Like generations had left the same warning. She documented every angle, zooming in close. She wandered through 2 more trailers, then back to the car to check her photos and jot notes. That's when the first weirdness hit. The burned porch trailer, her starting point, was straight ahead. But according to her mental map, she'd started there, moved away, and now should have been on the opposite side of the clearing. The trailer was in the same place it had been. She double-checked her notes. They all tracked a straight path. Trees looked the same all around her, the fading sun doing nothing to help orientation. Determined, she chose a new path, moving away from the burned porch toward the cluster of 3 small houses she remembered at the far end of the clearing. Step by step, she counted them, marking her path with a stick, dragging lines in the dirt behind her so she wouldn't get lost. 50, 100, 150, 200 steps. She stopped, heart hammering. The trailer was there, directly ahead, 30 feet away. She hadn't turned. She hadn't circled. The stick line behind her twisted impossibly, looping back on itself like the land itself had betrayed her. Her chest tightened. Panic clawed its way up. She pulled her phone, compass spinning wildly, no signal, nothing to guide her. The canopy blocked the sun. Shadows flattened all sense of direction. She looked at the trailer again. Something wasn't right. Everything was wrong. Her hands trembled as she dropped the stick and ran to the car. And that's when she saw it. On the driver's seat, her camera. The same camera that was still slung around her neck. She blinked, checked again. Both were there. Identical down to a small scratch on the lens cap. She froze. Shaking, she grabbed the duplicate. Static sparks made her jerk back. It was real, heavy, solid. She flipped it on. Fully charged. Memory card held 243 images. Her stomach sank as she scrolled. These weren't her shots. Angles wrong, timestamps off. Many showed her. Inside the trailers, around the clearing, photographed from impossible distances. One showed her entering the burned porch trailer from ground level, even though no one had been there. Another inside the dark house, from behind her. One even captured her in her car, time-stamped 15 minutes in the future. Her fingers dropped the camera. Her heartbeat roared. She yanked the car keys. Engine turned. Once. Twice. Then nothing. Dead. Battery fine minutes ago. Now dead. Maya grabbed her phone. 1 bar. She tried to call 911. Before it could connect, a text appeared. From her own number. You cannot leave the loop until you understand why you are here. Another text followed instantly. Check the camera. Photo 147. Hands moving on autopilot, she picked up the duplicate and flipped to the image. It was the burned porch trailer, back bedroom. Children's drawings on the walls. But behind the closet door, barely visible in the shadows, a figure. Humanoid, all wrong, limbs too long, head twisted at an unnatural angle. It held her camera. The exact same model, same scratch. She spun around. The trailer's door, once open, now slowly closed inward. Darkness inside. From that darkness, the unmistakable clicks of a camera. Click, 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 documenting her. Every window flashed, light like dozens of cameras firing. Maya slammed the keys in desperation, tried the engine again. It sputtered, coughed, and roared alive. She slammed it in reverse and floored it, fishtailing across mud, gravel, rocks. Branches scraped the windows like long, grasping fingers. Minutes or hours later, the road leveled, pavement under her tires. GPS blinked alive. Recalculating. Relief didn't come. She drove 3 hours straight, to civilization, lights, people, noise. Only then did she stop at a gas station, trembling. The duplicate camera sat on the passenger seat. She grabbed it, planning to toss it, but paused. A final photo appeared. Timestamp, 2 minutes ago. It showed her car from behind, on the highway. In the distance, trees of Copper Run Road. And a figure, small, unmistakable, holding a camera, watching her leave. Maya never returned. The duplicate camera sits in her closet. She can't throw it, can't bring herself to touch it. And late at night, she sometimes hears it power on, the shutter clicking, and knows the loop is still out there, waiting. Maya's hands trembled as she gripped the duplicate camera, every muscle tight with fear. The clearing behind her loomed like a trap she'd barely escaped. But the sense of being watched didn't fade. It grew heavier, pressing in from all sides. Her pulse raced as she tried to convince herself she was safe now, that the car, the pavement, the lights of town meant she had left that nightmare behind. She forced herself to check the camera again. Photo 147, the one that had revealed the shadowy figure, was still there, pulsing on the screen like a heartbeat. The figure's limbs were twisted, grotesque, holding her camera just as she had seen. The way it stared from the shadows felt alive, aware, waiting. She could almost hear it breathing in the frozen stillness of the photo, its eyes boring into her mind. Maya slammed the camera down and yanked the keys. The engine roared once, then sputtered again, coughing like it was struggling against some invisible hand. She hammered the pedal, the car skidding over gravel and mud, branches scraping the roof, clawing at the windows. Behind her, the forest seemed to twitch, branches bending toward her, the trees alive, trying to claw her back into the loop. Every second felt stretched thin, like time itself was mocking her. Flashes of light flickered in the mirrors, hundreds of windows across the trailers and small houses erupting with brief sparks, like 100 cameras capturing her escape. Click, click, click. A mechanical rhythm that sent ice down her spine. Maya didn't glance back. She couldn't. Minutes blurred into eternity as the road shifted from gravel to pavement. The forest finally loosened its grip, trees falling back as if unwilling to follow her farther. The GPS sprang to life, blinking, recalculating, mapping a route out. But relief was hollow. The duplicate camera still sat on the seat, quiet now, but impossibly real. She drove for hours, her hands locked tight on the wheel, eyes darting to the passenger side, to the horizon, to anything that might remind her she was alone. But she wasn't. Something lingered, waiting. At a gas station far from Copper Run Road, Maya finally pulled over. The lights felt almost alien in their normalcy. People moved, oblivious. The hum of engines, the murmur of voices, the beep of pumps. It all felt unreal, like she had stepped back into a different world. She grabbed the duplicate camera from the seat. For a second, her finger hovered over the eject button, ready to destroy it, erase whatever nightmare it had captured. But she froze. The memory card blinked alive, displaying one final photo, time-stamped just 2 minutes ago. It showed her car rolling down the highway from behind. The road stretched straight, normal. But in the distance at the tree line, the dark silhouette of Copper Run Road's clearing was visible. And standing at the edge, unmistakable, was the figure from the photos, camera in hand, watching her, documenting her escape. Maya's stomach churned. The realization hit her cold. The loop wasn't just a location. It wasn't just the burned porch trailer or the twisted double-wide. The loop was alive. It followed, it recorded, it waited, and she had been caught in it. She tried to rationalize, to ground herself in logic. But every explanation fell apart under the weight of what she'd seen. Angles that shouldn't exist, photos she hadn't taken, timestamps from the future, a duplicate camera appearing out of nowhere. None of it fit any known rules of reality. That night, in a hotel room miles from Copper Run, she couldn't sleep. Every shadow in the room seemed to stretch a little too long. Every creak of the floor sounded like a camera click. She kept the duplicate camera in her closet, unable to throw it out, unable to bring herself to examine it. But she knew it was there, waiting, humming with a life of its own. Weeks passed, but the mechanical clicking haunted her. Sometimes, late at night, she would hear it, soft, precise, unmistakable. The camera powering on, shutters snapping, recording. She would glance toward the closet and see nothing, yet feel its eyes on her, the loop watching, patient. Maya never returned to Copper Run Road. She refused to even speak the name aloud, afraid that acknowledging it might call it back. But she knows the clearing is still there, waiting for the next explorer who thinks they are the observer. The loop is patient. It watches. It photographs. And it always remembers. The duplicate camera remains locked away, its memory card storing horrors she cannot erase, capturing images that defy explanation. Somewhere, in that twisted clearing, the figure still moves, still holds a camera, still waits. And she knows, somewhere deep in the shadows of Copper Run Road, it is ready for the next person to wander in, thinking they are alone, thinking they are safe. Maya can never go back. She knows now that in that loop, you are never the observer. You are always the observed. George was 31 and a freelance photographer, mostly snapping real estate and architectural shots. He was used to the weird corners of the world, mansions with more dust than cash, half-built houses, properties abandoned mid-project. Fires, foreclosures, water damage, none of it rattled him. He had a process. Get in, take the photos, move on. But the job he took in late September 2019 would tear that routine apart. The call came from a regional bank, A small mountain development in western North Carolina had gone under. The developer, a guy named Marcus Webb, had started a cul-de-sac in Birch Hollow, a handful of homes for retirees chasing quiet mountain life. Webb had built 4 houses and framed 2 more before his money ran dry in 2017. Now the bank owned the land and needed full documentation before deciding whether to tear it down or hand it to a new builder. George's task was simple. Shoot every house inside and out, note conditions, write a detailed report. He figured he'd knock it out in an afternoon. Birch Hollow was 40 minutes out of Asheville, a twisty 2-lane climbing into the mountains. The cul-de-sac ended in forest, asphalt fading into earth. He arrived just after noon on a crisp Friday in October. The neighborhood looked paused mid-construction, frozen in decay and quiet. 4 finished houses sat in a row, clean siding, intact windows. But weeds had claimed the lawns, waist-high and waving like ghostly hands. 2 skeletal frames rose further down the circle, exposed studs jutting into the sky. An excavated foundation marked where a 5th structure was supposed to sit. Construction equipment littered the lot. A backhoe near the foundation, a generator tossed by a framed house. George started with the exteriors, working house by house. Each finished home was modest, 2-bedroom ranchers with attached garages. He shot every angle, noting the surprisingly good condition despite years of neglect. Inside, the homes were mostly untouched too. Finished floors, painted walls, fixtures intact, empty of furniture and appliances. In the 3rd house, he saw signs someone had been there recently. Fast food wrappers cluttered the counters. Muddy footprints traced the living room floor. Probably kids or transient locals, he thought. Stuff like that happened at every abandoned property eventually. Then he reached the 4th house. Immediately, something felt off. The door wasn't just unlocked. It was slightly ajar, swaying in the breeze. Black plastic sheeting covered every window from the inside, blocking sunlight. George pushed the door and called out, announcing himself. Silence. He stepped in, the air hitting him like a wall. A sharp chemical stench mingled with something organic and rotten, making his eyes sting. The house was dark, the plastic windows turning it into a cave. He flicked on his flashlight. The main living space looked lived in. A camping mattress lay crumpled in a corner, sleeping bags tossed over it. Empty water bottles and canned food stacked near the kitchen. A folding chair faced a battery-powered lantern. Then he saw the basement door. Heavy chains looped through a padlock screwed to the frame. In an otherwise open house, someone had gone to serious lengths to lock this down. George photographed the lock and chains, noting every detail. He tested the handle, expecting resistance, but it swung open easily. The chain and padlock were for show. He descended the wooden stairs, the smell growing stronger, burning his nostrils. The basement was stark concrete, unfinished, with support posts spaced at intervals and pipes overhead. But dominating the room was a massive chest freezer, the industrial kind used for bulk storage. It hummed, powered by the generator outside. Thick chains wrapped around it, secured with a heavy padlock. George's skin crawled. Why go to the trouble of locking a freezer in an abandoned house? He photographed it from every angle, getting close-ups of the lock and chains. His hands shook. Part of him screamed to leave and call the cops, but another part, his curiosity, demanded answers. He had bolt cutters in his truck for situations like this, sheds, gates, locked doors at foreclosures. He debated for a second, then grabbed them and headed back down. Every step felt heavier than the last, his mind spinning with what could be inside. Hunters? Food storage? Or something far worse? The chains came off in chunks, easier than he expected, The padlock on the freezer lid required leverage, but snapped under pressure. The clang echoed through the basement like a gunshot. George placed his hands on the lid, cold through the rubber seal. He counted to 3, braced himself, and lifted. Inside were industrial-strength plastic bags, sealed and layered, zip ties holding them tight. Through the frost, he saw dark shapes, organic, human-like, and horrifying. Denim, faded cloth, a shoe, long strands of hair frozen in ice. His stomach churned, and his flashlight slipped from his grasp, spinning across the floor, casting chaotic shadows. Panicked, he fumbled for his phone, hands trembling, and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. George's words came out jumbled, fragmented. He managed to give the address, insist that human remains were in the freezer. The dispatcher told him to leave the building immediately and wait outside for police. George bolted upstairs and out the front door, gulping the cold mountain air, trying to steady his shaking hands. The cul-de-sac felt sinister now, the houses silent witnesses. He moved to the center of the circle, far from the fourth house, and called his bank contact, giving a brief, strained account. She went silent for a moment, then promised someone from legal would come right away. Within 15 minutes, a police cruiser arrived. Then 3 more, plus an unmarked sedan. George explained everything to a detective, showed his photos. They asked if he touched anything else besides the freezer. He mentioned the chains and padlock. The detective nodded grimly and had him wait by his truck while they secured the scene. Hours passed. The property became a full-blown crime scene. Yellow tape wrapped the fourth house. State crime lab vans, medical examiners, protective suits, equipment and evidence moved in and out. George gave 2 more statements, repeating the same facts for different investigators. He learned the bank had only ever done a superficial external inspection. No one had entered the houses before him. As dusk fell, the detective returned. George could leave, but would need to give a formal statement the next day. He asked what was inside. The detective only said George had been right to call them, and the contents were now part of an active homicide investigation. George drove away, the mountain air heavy in his lungs. News crews arrived as darkness settled. Local TV covered it that night. National outlets picked it up the next day. Police confirmed human remains, 3 females, aged 17 to 24, dead for varying lengths of time. Some remains possibly dated back 5 to 6 years. George couldn't shake the weight of what he had seen. Birch Hollow, once just a quiet mountain development, had become a crime scene straight out of a nightmare. Over the next few days, details trickled in, each revelation darker than the last. The 3 bodies in the freezer were confirmed as female, ages 17 to 24, but the forensic team noted varying times of death. The oldest had been dead for at least 5 or 6 years. Whoever had done this had been working in silence for a long, long time. The investigation widened fast. Detectives traced the construction crews, looking at anyone who'd had access to the abandoned homes. The developer, Marcus Webb, was quickly ruled out. He hadn't been involved in the day-to-day work for years. The attention shifted to one of the drifters who had floated through various construction sites, a man named Carl Pritchard. Pritchard had hopped between jobs across 5 states, always under the radar, always blending in. He'd been on the Birch Hollow site when the cul-de-sac was built. George sat through hours of interviews at the station, recounting everything. The freezer, the chains, the eerie emptiness of the fourth house, the hum of the generator keeping it alive. He showed them his photographs, the ones that caught every detail of the basement and freezer. The detectives were solemn, nodding as he described each step. His hands still shook when he held the bolt cutters, the memory of lifting that lid making his stomach churn. As the pieces came together, Investigators realized Pritchard had been living intermittently in the fourth house. He used the generator to keep the freezer cold, a construction portable toilet for hygiene, and never left much evidence outside of what George had stumbled on. He had carefully created a private, chilling little ecosystem of death, hiding in plain sight while moving across states, his crimes spanning Tennessee, Virginia, and West Virginia over nearly a decade. The arrest came quietly. Pritchard was taken into custody without incident. Charges piled up. Multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, and abuse. George's testimony became central. He walked into the courtroom months later, facing the man whose horror he had uncovered, and relived every moment. The heavy lid, the ice-cold plastic, the sight of frozen hair and clothing. The trial was long, grisly, and deeply unsettling. Evidence from Birch Hollow dominated the proceedings, including George's photos and his account of discovering the freezer. Families of the victims attended, some nodding to George in silent thanks. When Pritchard was finally convicted, the judge handed down 3 consecutive life sentences without parole. Relief for some, closure for a few. But George felt no triumph, only a deep, enduring sadness for the lives lost, for the darkness he had uncovered. After the trial, George refused to return to Birch Hollow. The bank eventually sold the property to a new developer who demolished the old homes and started fresh. New streets, new names, a sanitized history that erased the horror that had taken place there. George continued working as a photographer, but drew a hard line at abandoned properties. He had learned, painfully, that some doors exist for a reason, and some things should never be opened. Even now, months later, he thought about the fourth house, about the hum of that freezer, about the quiet of the cul-de-sac before it became a crime scene. He pictured the abandoned structures, silent and waiting, and the meticulous way Pritchard had hidden his atrocities. Every detail of that day remained burned into his memory. The smell, the shadows, the unnatural stillness. He knew some places kept secrets that would gnaw at anyone foolish enough to step inside. George's life went on, outwardly normal, but he carried the weight of Birch Hollow with him. Every new assignment at ordinary homes, ordinary buildings, made him glance over his shoulder, half expecting to find something hidden in plain sight. He never underestimated the quiet anymore. There were doors that shouldn't be opened, basements that should remain sealed, and in the mountains of North Carolina, sometimes the prettiest facades hid the darkest horrors. And though the case was solved, the lessons lingered. George still remembered the hum of the generator, the metallic chill of the freezer, the sense of being watched as he descended into that basement. He remembered the industrial-strength bags, frozen forms within, and how the shadows seemed to move in tandem with his own. It was a horror he couldn't unsee, a truth he carried like a scar beneath his skin. Some nights, he caught himself thinking about the other abandoned homes he had photographed over the years. How many were truly empty? How many had secrets tucked behind padlocks, behind locked doors, behind walls no one ever looked behind? Birch Hollow had been a warning. A reminder that evil could hide in plain sight, waiting decades to be discovered. And George had been the unlucky one to find it first. He never returned to that cul-de-sac. He never looked at the news footage from the trial without a shiver. He still photographs buildings, but now he moves with caution, respect, and a new understanding. Some places are empty for a reason, and some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. Because once you glimpse what waits beyond, you carry it with you forever. Isabella, 19 and home for summer break from college, had mostly been chilling with nothing to do. That is, until her friends suggested they check out the old church perched on Shepherd's Hill, a crumbling relic whispered about in their little West Virginia town. The place had been the heart of Greystone's Mill neighborhood for nearly 6 decades, shuttered in 2004 when only a handful of elderly folks remained in the congregation. Since then, the church had sat abandoned, looming over what was left of the town below. Most of the mill houses had either rotted away or been torn down, but the church still stubbornly stood. Its white steeple jutted skyward, leaning slightly, like a skeletal finger accusing the heavens. Stories about the church had followed Isabella since she was a kid. Locals swore that on foggy evenings the bell would toll, calling unseen worshippers to a service that would never happen. The catch? The bell had been removed years before the congregation closed and sent to a newer church a couple of counties away. Isabella had always chalked it up to small-town boredom and ghost stories. But tonight, with the oppressive July heat pressing down and friends pressing her to go, she decided she had nothing better to do. There were 4 of them. Isabella rode with Marcus, her childhood friend, while twins Sarah and Tom took another car. They met at the base of the hill just as the sunset smeared the sky in burnt orange and bruised purple. The path to the church was barely more than 2 muddy ruts, steep and overgrown. They parked at the bottom, grabbed flashlights and phones, and started hiking. The climb took 15 minutes, and by the time they reached the top, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the fog to crawl up from the valley like some living thing. The church was worse up close. Peeling white paint revealed gray wood beneath. Broken windows gaped like missing teeth. The front doors sagged on rusted hinges. One had fallen off entirely, lying in the weeds. The steeple leaned ominously to the left, and the whole structure seemed to sag under its own weight. Isabella snapped photos while Marcus pushed the remaining door open. The wood creaked, echoing across the hilltop, and suddenly the isolation hit them. No houses, no lights, just wind whispering through the skeletal trees. Inside, the church was a single hall lined with pews leading to the pulpit. Hymnals were scattered everywhere, some open on benches, others piled on the warped floorboards. Isabella froze. Every single hymnal she could see was opened to the same page. She picked one up, dusty, crawling with dead bugs. Page 217. When the roll is called up yonder. She flipped a few more, every single one. Sarah noticed it too and nudged the others. Marcus suggested humidity or warped pages might have caused it, but Isabella checked carefully. No water damage. This was deliberate. Tom climbed up to the pulpit, calling out he'd found something. The others joined him cautiously. Behind the pulpit was a small, locked-looking door, probably to a storage area or the bell tower. No visible lock, but it wouldn't budge. They heaved on it together, muscles straining, but the door stayed sealed, as though nailed from the inside. Isabella ran her fingers along the frame, checking for hidden fasteners. That's when she saw it. Muddy footprints. Small, likely a child or a woman, fresh, leading from the altar straight to the door. They stopped right in front of it, vanishing, as though the person had simply disappeared. Isabella crouched, inspecting the tread. Hiking boots or work shoes. More prints led backward toward the altar. No trail leading into the church. Whoever had been here hadn't come through the main door. Sarah's voice cracked. "We should go." She kept glancing at the windows, where the fog pressed like it had life. But before anyone could respond, the bell rang. Clear, deep, vibrating through their chests. 3 chimes, perfectly spaced. Then silence, thick and heavy, like it was pressing down on them. Marcus swept his flashlight upward, tracing where stairs might lead to the tower. The locked door behind the pulpit remained unmoved. They froze, unsure who would move first. Tom checked his phone. 8:47 p.m. Sarah gasped. Hers read 9:23. Isabella's phone, 7:51. Marcus's phone, 10:06. 4 people, same moment, 4 different times. "Let's get outside," Isabella suggested. "Better reception. Reset the phones." They moved toward the door together. As they stepped outside, the bell rang again. 3 chimes, same tone, seemingly from inside the walls. Isabella shouted, asking if anyone was there, if it was a prank. Her voice echoed. No answer. The fog had thickened while they were inside, choking the hilltop. GPS on Marcus's phone placed them in the middle of the valley, not on the hill. Sarah had no signal. Tom's phone was frozen at 10:06. Isabella tried calling her mom, connected to a stranger's voice. "Greystone Community Church, how may I help you?" She hung up. That church had been torn down 15 years ago. They started walking down, tightly grouped, cautious. The descent should have been 15 minutes. 30 minutes later, they were back at the top. The church loomed before them, unchanged. They had walked a complete circle without turning, every step straight, yet ended up exactly where they started. The fog hadn't followed, stopping 20 feet from the building, as if something invisible held it back. Marcus suggested waiting for morning when the fog burned off. Isabella checked her phone, 3:15 a.m. Minutes had passed since their last check. Time was moving differently for each of them. She returned to the church and shouted, demanding to know why they were here. The bell answered. 3 chimes, and beneath the sound, a choir. Voices, dozens, singing. Melody unmistakable. Hymn 217. Lights flickered inside like candles. Against instinct, she stepped in. The others followed. Inside, the church had changed. Pews were filled with translucent figures, singing, hymnals in hand, mouths moving in silent song. At the pulpit, a ghostly minister presided, ignoring the living. Isabella walked to the locked door behind the pulpit, drawn by something primal. The muddy footprints glowed faintly, leading her upward. Isabella's hand touched the door, and it swung open like it had been waiting for her. Darkness stretched upward, stairs curling in a tight spiral. The singing stopped instantly. Every phantom in the pews froze, turning hollow-eyed toward her, their faces a mix of yearning and warning. Heart hammering, she climbed. The others followed, tight behind her, every step groaning underfoot. The spiral felt endless, the air thick, smelling of damp wood and dust. At last, they reached a tiny platform at the top of the steeple. The bell hung from ancient beams, massive and tarnished, but it wasn't alone. Every wall, every inch of wood was carved with names. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Isabella squinted at the scratching, tracing letters with her finger. Names she recognized. Mill workers lost in accidents, children who vanished, elderly congregation members long buried. One name etched deep into the center asked, chillingly, "Do you remember us?" Isabella fumbled for her phone and snapped a photo. The flash lit the steeple in stark white. The bell rang, sudden, deafening, shaking the wood and their bones. When the echo faded, they weren't inside anymore. They were standing outside the church, morning sun spilling over the hill. Fog was gone, the valley below clear, their cars waiting. They checked their phones. All 4 matched. 6:37 a.m. 8 hours had passed, though it had felt like barely 2. The hill was quiet. Their descent this time followed a straight, true path. At the bottom, they compared clocks. Each car's showed a different time. Each of them had lived the night differently, twisted by some force inside the church. Isabella never returned to Shepherd's Hill. She dove into research, uncovering fragments of truth behind the legend. The bell had been removed in 1998, but briefly returned in 2003 for a memorial service for mill workers lost 30 years prior. 3 chimes rang during that service. Then the bell was removed again, sent to a new congregation. Yet locals swore on foggy nights it still rang, calling to the forgotten, demanding remembrance from a town that had moved on. The memory haunted Isabella. Every time the wind rustled through the trees or fog rolled into town, her stomach sank. She told friends the story sparingly. Most dismissed it as teenage imagination. But she knew better. Some places held on to the past, pressed it into the living air. Some sounds carried across decades, echoing through time itself. Hymn 217, the ghosts, the names, they were all proof that memory, grief, and loss had a weight heavy enough to twist reality. Marcus, Sarah, and Tom shared her silence. None spoke of the church afterward, except in clipped references. Even months later, they couldn't fully reconcile what had happened, what they had seen. Each carried the dissonance differently. Marcus sometimes checked the hill from the valley, scanning for movement. Sarah would avoid fog entirely, rerouting her runs and walks. Tom refused to climb any hill taller than a few feet. Isabella tried to reconcile the experience logically. Engineering studies had taught her patterns, measurements, cause and effect, but the hill defied reason. Time warped, the bell rang without a bell, footsteps appeared from nowhere. Logic had no place on Shepherd's Hill. The memory of the steeple haunted her dreams. That carved question, "Do you remember us?" She would wake in the night, repeating it silently, feeling the weight of those lives pressing on her chest. Sometimes she imagined the translucent congregation, mouths moving in silent song, eyes fixed on her, waiting. Even now, when she drives past the hill, the white steeple barely visible, she feels it. Something in the air changes. The fog drifts differently. Shadows shift just beyond vision. She doesn't speak of it. She doesn't climb back. But deep down, Isabella knows the hill is patient. It remembers everything, waits for those willing, or foolish enough, to answer its call. And on nights when the fog rolls down the valley, she swears she can hear it. 3 slow, deliberate chimes, carrying across the town, calling to those who would listen. Poppy was 24, grinding out a living as a freelance journalist, digging into old legends and the kind of local ghost stories people whispered about in Kentucky hollers. That's how she first caught wind of the woman at Hollow's Edge. It came up in an interview with Vernon Moss, a 78-year-old who'd lived his whole life in the same Pike County valley. He was rattling off stories about abandoned mines and lost settlements when he dropped Marlow Hollow into the conversation, a stretch of homes where mailboxes never seemed to last. Poppy's fingers froze above her laptop keys. "Say that again?" she asked, looking up. Vernon grinned, like he'd been waiting for her to catch it. He leaned back in his chair, eyes crinkling with that sly, secretive smile. "Marlow Hollow," he said again, slow and deliberate. "A string of properties down a single lane that ends at the foot of a steep mountain." In the 1950s and 60s, he explained, it had been home to a handful of families tied to the coal mines. But even then, the hollow had a reputation. People came, people left. Unwritten rules governed life there. The most chilling story, Vernon said, involved a woman in white. Whenever someone new moved in, she appeared at the property line at dusk, silent, watching, waiting. And then she asked the same question every time. "Are you planning to stay long enough to hear what happened?" Nobody ever stayed long enough. That detail got Poppy hooked. Vernon insisted the legend wasn't just folklore. He claimed that every newcomer encountered her, and every single one fled within months. And the mailboxes? That was the pattern you could see. Every new resident installed one. Within weeks, it would be broken, snapped, always bent or pointing toward the old stone well at the lane's dead end. Vernon even had photographs, decades worth, showing the same destruction repeated over and over. He offered directions, and Poppy accepted immediately. She arrived on a gray, overcast afternoon in late September. The lane was narrow and rough, squeezing her little rental car between thick forest walls. She passed 3 properties before the road ended, and there it was. The stone well, a small clearing, grass flattened around it like someone had spun in endless circles. The houses were old, faded, some clearly abandoned, others barely hanging on. The mailboxes hit her first. At each driveway, one leaned at a broken angle or was snapped clean from its post. All pointed toward the well. She parked and started photographing each one, circling them from multiple angles. When she knocked on the first house, she heard curtains twitch, but no answer. Second house, same deal. Third, an older woman finally opened the door, face tight with warning. "Leave before evening. Stay away from the well," she said, shutting the door when Poppy pressed for details. The fourth house was dead silent, clearly abandoned. Its mailbox lay torn in the ditch, and the windows stared blankly. Poppy stepped cautiously toward the well. The stone was old, rotted in places, a wooden cover collapsing in spots. She shined her flashlight into the darkness. Dry. Debris and leaves collected over decades. But her eyes caught the carvings etched into the stones around the top. Names, dates. Some barely legible, others fresh. The oldest from 1897, the newest 2019. She circled the clearing, noting the flattened grass. It formed a near-perfect circle, about 30 feet across, with the well dead center. Her photographer's instincts kicked in, framing shots, documenting every detail. And she noticed the alignment. Every broken mailbox, if you extended the angle, aimed directly at the well. Lines converging on the center like a warning. As late afternoon slid into evening, Poppy set up her camera on a tripod near the well, aiming to capture the whole clearing and the road beyond. She wanted a time-lapse overnight, hoping to catch whatever was smashing mailboxes. Vernon's warning not to stay after dark echoed in her mind, but she shrugged it off. A journalist couldn't let superstition dictate her work. She grabbed her laptop and camping chair from the car, setting up near the well. Sun sank behind the ridges, shadows stretching across the clearing. Reviewing her day's shots, she froze. Something impossible appeared in the background. A woman in white, standing at the tree line about 20 yards from the well. Poppy had been alone all afternoon. No one had approached. No one had been there. Yet the figure appeared in a dozen images, always in roughly the same spot, facing the camera. Her hands shook as she zoomed in. The face refused focus. Not blurred, but shifting. Every photo slightly different. The dress looked old-fashioned, sleeves long, collar modest, from the 1940s or 50s. Hands clasped, posture still, waiting, patient, endless. Then Poppy checked the timestamps. The woman had been there for over 3 hours, and yet she had never seen her. Poppy stood, scanning the tree line with her flashlight. Nothing. Mist rolled in from the hollow, curling through the trees. Her voice was small, uncertain. "Anyone there? I saw you in my photos. I just want to talk." A response came from somewhere near the well. Quiet, but distinct. "Are you planning to stay long enough to hear what happened?" Poppy spun. There she was, less than 10 feet from the well. She hadn't walked there. She simply existed. Her face turned toward Poppy. Up close, the features weren't blurry. They shifted, moving between ages, identities, multiple people occupying the same space. "Yes, I'm staying. I want to know what happened," Poppy said, voice tight with fear. The woman's head tilted, speaking again in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the trees and stones. "They threw us down there one by one. 37 over 73 years. We asked the wrong questions, saw the wrong things, refused to leave. The last was a mailman who asked about the broken mailboxes. They showed him." She gestured at the well. Poppy realized in a stomach-dropping moment the names weren't residents. They were victims.
"Who did this?" Poppy asked, stepping back toward her gear.
The woman didn't move, but continued, voice splitting, echoing. "The ones who live here still. The ones who have always lived here. They protect the hollow secret. We mark the boundary. Every mailbox pointing to us is a warning. Every newcomer is given a choice. Leave or learn. Learning means joining us." Poppy tore down her camera from the tripod, hands trembling. The woman watched, still as stone. "You've seen us now, heard the story. You must choose." Poppy grabbed her equipment and ran for the car. She didn't stop for the chair, the laptop, or the rest of her supplies. As she started the engine, she noticed all 3 occupied houses now had figures on their porches, silent and staring. Headlights swept over them, expressionless, unblinking. Glancing in the rearview mirror, she saw the woman in white standing in the middle of the road. Beside her were dozens of others, all in white, watching her drive away.
Poppy didn't stop until the hollow faded behind her, the gravel crunching under her tires like bones. She went straight to the sheriff's office, dragging herself inside, heart still hammering, hands trembling. She laid out the photos, close-ups of the well, the carved names, the flattened circle of grass, the mailboxes pointing like fingers. Every shot precise, every detail horrifying. A deputy took the images, nodding politely. "We'll check it out first thing tomorrow," he said, like he'd heard stranger tales before. Poppy explained everything, down to the shifting face, the multi-voice echo, the figures on the porches. The deputy scribbled notes, but didn't show the fear that still clung to her bones. The next day, he drove out to Marlow Hollow.
Poppy's stomach sank when he returned with a blank look. The well was still there, solid, but the carvings? Gone. The stones were smooth, unmarked. The mailboxes were broken, sure, but the damage looked ordinary, mundane. Wind, rot, vandalism. Nothing supernatural. And the figures? Not a trace. Not in the photos, not in person. He suggested she might have been seeing things. Stress, maybe carbon monoxide from running your car with the engine on while you waited. His tone was calm, clinical. Poppy didn't argue, but she knew what she saw. The images on her camera couldn't lie.
She didn't go back. Not ever.
But she kept digging, even from the safety of her apartment, diving into public records, newspapers, anything she could find on Marlow Hollow. Missing persons reports cropped up, 17 of them over 70 years, all tied to the hollow. Newcomers, people who had recently visited, all vanished. Cases closed quietly. No explanations. No answers. Vernon Moss, her first source, died 3 weeks after her visit. Obituary noted his lifelong life in Pike County, his beloved presence in the community, but also, almost as an afterthought, that he had once lived in Marlow Hollow. He'd moved away as a young man,
one of the rare few to escape before his mailbox broke. Poppy sat at her desk late at night, scrolling through her photos. The broken mailboxes, the carvings, the flattened circle of grass. Her fingers traced the names and dates, stomach knotting tighter with each one. Then she stopped at the photos of the woman. Zooming in, she saw the subtle, impossible shifts in her face, the youth flicking to age, the features splitting, merging, a kaleidoscope of identities trapped in a single body. Her phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. Leave or learn. She jumped, heart thudding. No signal, no trace of the sender in her contacts. Only those 3 words. Panic gripped her chest. She shoved the phone aside, but the unease lingered, crawling like ice through her veins. Weeks passed. The images haunted her dreams. She saw the well in every shadow, felt the gaze of those silent figures on her porch, heard the multi-voice whisper bouncing through her apartment walls at night. Learning means joining us. Every time she passed a mailbox, she flinched. Every time she glimpsed a white figure in the corner of her vision, she froze. Marlow Hollow had left a mark on her, a shadow she couldn't shake. She tried to tell herself it was just legend, folklore, stress, exhaustion. But she couldn't explain the timestamps, the hours-long presence of the woman she never saw. Couldn't rationalize the alignment of broken mailboxes pointing at the well like some ritualistic compass. Couldn't explain the flattened circle, 3 decades of ghostly repetition. And sometimes, late at night, she thought she could hear faint whispers from the woods behind her apartment, echoing that same question. Are you planning to stay long enough to hear what happened? Her research led her to old newspapers, archival records, public documents. Every new resident of Marlow Hollow over the decades had encountered the same phenomenon. Every mailbox broken. Every person eventually leaving or disappearing. The pattern was perfect, terrifying, inescapable. She imagined Vernon as a young man, mail in hand, standing before the well, wondering if he could last. He had left. He had survived. But everyone else? Gone. Each broken mailbox, each scratched name in the stone, each figure glimpsed at dusk. It was a warning, a tally, a record of those who had failed the test. Poppy never went back. Not even to photograph the hollow from the road. Not even to check the mailboxes, which, rumor had it, continued to break on their own. But she kept the photos, the timestamps, the images of the woman in white, the carved names, the flattened grass. Stored on a hard drive, in a locked drawer. Evidence she couldn't erase, nightmares she couldn't ignore. Sometimes she reviewed them deliberately, like some morbid ritual, studying every detail, counting the figures, tracing the lines of the mailboxes, memorizing the shifting face. Sometimes, if she stared long enough, she could almost see the movement in the corners of the frame, the subtle shifts of the multi-voice figure, the way the hollow seemed to breathe in the photos. The last thing she saw in one shot, snapped while adjusting the tripod in fading light, made her catch her breath. In the shadow behind her camera, beneath the trees, a pale shape clung to the edge of the clearing. Limbs bent wrong, impossibly jointed, eyes reflecting light like some inhuman predator. Watching, waiting. And she knew, without doubt, that if anyone else moved to Marlow Hollow, the story would repeat. Mailboxes would break. Names would be carved. The woman in white would appear, and the choice would come again. Leave or learn. Poppy shut her laptop. The apartment was silent. She could still feel the hollow out there, in the dark, waiting for the next visitor, counting the years, the mailboxes, the lives. And she knew she would never stop hearing that whisper in her head, the question that had been asked for over 70 years.
Are you planning to stay long enough to hear what happened?
Harry was 28, grinding through the usual slog of field inspections for a regional insurance outfit, when he got the call that would stick in his skull for the rest of his life. Normally, he rolled from storm-battered barns to charred houses, snapping photos, scribbling reports, figuring out what the company would pay out. Routine, predictable, remote. He knew the back roads of eastern Kentucky and southern West Virginia better than the main highways. This job, though, was different. Bridge Hollow. Locals barely called it a town. 6 rickety houses jammed up against an old railroad bridge, foundations practically fused into the stone and steel like they'd grown there. The claim came from Margaret Hayes, one of the last holdouts in that ghostly cluster. She said something was invading her home, tearing through insulation and beams, crawling under the floors. The company wanted photos, detailed notes, maybe proof to deny the claim, because it smelled fishy. Harry called Margaret first. Her voice was tight, trembling, warning him to come only in daylight and to leave before dark. When he pressed for why, she just repeated herself and hung up. Perfectly creepy, he thought, exactly the kind of tip-off he liked to keep an eye on. The drive out there was brutal. Potholes tried to eat his truck alive, ruts choked with grass. The kind of road you pray your suspension survives. Then, without warning, the bridge appeared. A massive stone and steel skeleton spanning a deep ravine, creek whispering and churning below. The rails were gone, wood rotting, support beams groaning. 6 houses clung to it like parasites, tiny and wooden, some barely perched over the drop, held by stilts that looked like they could snap in a strong wind. Harry parked near the first house, stepping into heat heavy with rust and wet earth. Silence wrapped everything but the creek's murmur. He counted the houses. 6. Only 2 looked alive, curtains hanging, yards tended. The rest were dark, sagging, staring at him like dead eyes. Margaret's place was the second house from the left, faded yellow with grayed white trim. She was on the porch before he could knock, thin, 60-ish, hair pulled tight into a bun. No small talk, straight inside. The back bedroom showed him why she'd sounded so frantic. The floor was a map of violence, deep scratches gouged in parallel lines, sets of 4 or 5 hugging the walls. Some planks ripped up completely, exposing the crawl space beneath. Harry knelt, fingertips tracing the grooves. Strength like he'd never felt before. Old hardwood, torn like butter. Margaret rubbed her hands together, voice trembling. 3 months of scratching, every night. Coming from below. Sounds like something massive, dragging itself under the floor. At first, she thought raccoons, possums, but these weren't normal. Heavy, deliberate. She'd called animal control. They wouldn't touch it. Her neighbor had left years ago, giving up. Harry asked if he could see the crawl space. Margaret froze, then led him around. A small panel, latched shut. She'd never opened it, too scared of what might be inside. Harry grabbed his flashlight, camera, and a crowbar. The panel came off easy. Darkness yawned at him. A stench hit, a mix of mold, musk, and something decayed that wasn't quite animal. He crawled in, stomach flat against the cold earth, flashlight swinging. The crawl space was a nightmare. Wood clawed, insulation shredded. Bones scattered, neat circles of small animal skeletons, arranged as if someone, or something, was cataloging them. The crawl ran under all 6 houses, passages tucked in the gaps where they met the bridge. Harry could see tunnels stretching into shadow. His camera clicked, heart thumping. He knelt by a circle of bones, trying not to panic. And then he heard it. Low, wet breaths from deeper down, past the abandoned houses. Not raccoon, not dog. Too big, too measured. His flashlight quivered as the sound drew closer. Scraping followed, claws on wood, deliberate, precise. Harry scrambled backward, every muscle screaming, banging his gear against beams, light swinging wild. He burst out of the crawl space, collapsing into the dirt yard. Margaret stood on the porch, pale as the moon. "Did you see it?" she asked. He shook his head, shaking. "I heard it. That's enough." She nodded like she'd known he wouldn't go back. Her neighbor, she said, had seen it once. Described something that shouldn't exist, limbs too long, joints bending wrong, crawling under the houses like a spider with too many legs. Harry swallowed hard. He spent the next hour photographing the exterior, documenting scratches inside. Sounds tapped beneath the floors, rhythmic, moving as if whatever lurked below was watching, following him. Margaret begged him to finish before dark. He didn't need convincing. He packed up. But then he saw it. In the yard, impressions in the soft dirt, hand-like but grotesquely wrong. Fingers too long, palms narrow, claws instead of nails. They led from under the house, across the yard, disappearing toward the bridge as if whatever made them had climbed up under the structure. Harry snapped photos and got in his truck without a word. From his rear view, he saw it. A shape, massive, moving along the underside of the bridge with fluid, unnatural motion. Limbs bending at impossible angles. It paused, seemed aware of him, then dropped into the ravine, vanishing into shadow. Harry filed his report that night. Evacuation, structural inspection. His boss called the next day, suggesting maybe the isolation and Margaret's hysteria had rattled him. Harry insisted the facts were accurate. The insurance company sent another inspector. Minimal damage, nothing extraordinary. Margaret withdrew her claim, vanished without a forwarding address. Bridge Hollow sits still. Only one house occupied. Harry never went back. He left insurance entirely. Photos remain, locked in a hard drive, evidence of what shouldn't exist. Scratches, bones, clawed tracks, and in one accidental frame, a pale figure hanging from the floorboards, limbs all wrong, eyes catching light where no animal could survive. Harry couldn't shake it. Even weeks later, the images haunted him. He'd replay the crawl space in his mind over and over. The smell, the cramped darkness, the wet, deliberate breathing. At night, he'd see it in his dreams, sprawling along the bridge's underbelly, limbs folding like knives, staring back with those impossible eyes. Bridge Hollow felt like it existed outside the world. The way the houses clung to the bridge, the tunnels weaving beneath them, it wasn't just a location. It was a trap. Harry knew, the way his gut tightened every time he thought about it, that whatever lived down there had patience. It waited. Always. He tried to put the job behind him. He worked other claims, drove other backroads, but Bridge Hollow kept creeping into his thoughts. He couldn't explain why no one else reported the horrors he'd seen. The second inspector's photos didn't match. Animal damage, they said. Raccoon scratches. Groundhogs. Harry laughed bitterly at the memory, the lie echoing in his head. Animal control hadn't wanted to touch it for a reason. On nights when the wind rattled his windows, Harry imagined those long limbs, clinging to floorboards above him, waiting, listening. He pictured the pale shape caught in his camera's flash, its back arched impossibly, fingers curling like hooks. Somewhere, just out of reach, it still lurked. He couldn't tell anyone. No one would believe him. Insurance companies didn't deal in monsters. They dealt in damage, in numbers, in checklists. And if he tried, they'd laugh, dismiss him, or worse, call him paranoid. So he kept the photos,
stored on a locked hard drive in his drawer, evidence of something the world pretended didn't exist. Sometimes he'd open a folder just to look. One image made him nearly drop the drive. The bones arranged in perfect circles beneath Margaret's floorboards. A few scraps of cloth, shredded and rotted, caught in the debris. The claw marks lined up, etched into the wood like some ritualistic signature. The tracks outside, elongated hands, stretching across the dirt yard and disappearing beneath the bridge. Every shot confirmed what he already knew. It was intelligent. It waited. It organized. Margaret's warning echoed in his mind. Never stay after dark. He'd replay her words, the strain in her voice. He could see her nod as he emerged from the crawl space, understanding exactly what he'd just witnessed. She hadn't exaggerated. That thing had lived beneath the bridge for years, feeding, learning, waiting. He thought of her neighbor, the one who'd fled years earlier. He had seen it too. Maybe he'd screamed, maybe he'd been lucky enough to get away, but Harry knew the stories in Bridge Hollow never ended. They just moved silently beneath the surface. Months later, Harry tried to rationalize the photographs. He called old friends, former colleagues. Maybe it was a bear, someone suggested. Harry laughed, a bitter rasp. A bear doesn't make hand-like tracks, doesn't leave neat bone circles, doesn't crawl through crawl spaces like a shadow stretched too long. It doesn't bend its limbs at angles that shouldn't exist. He hung up. No one would understand. No one could. He started sleeping with the lights on, sometimes leaving a door cracked to hear if anything was moving in the dark. Every creak, every snap of a branch sent him into a sweat. He knew it wasn't paranoia. He knew it. He could feel it lurking just beyond his perception, somewhere that shouldn't exist, waiting for another crack, another opening. On bad nights, he'd revisit the photos of the clawed floorboards. He traced each gouge with his eyes, imagining the power it took to carve them so precisely. He pictured the crawl space under all 6 houses, the gaps connecting them like veins. The thing could move anywhere in that network. Anywhere. He felt it beneath him in his bed sometimes, a premonition, a shadow scraping along the floor. Harry stopped talking about Bridge Hollow altogether. He left the insurance industry, telling himself it was for better pay elsewhere, less stress, a change of scenery. But it wasn't the job. It was the memory of the thing, fluid, patient, intelligent, that had embedded itself in his mind. It had seen him. It knew he'd seen it, and he had no illusions it would forget. Years later, when he felt brave or foolish, he'd pull the hard drive out. He examined the elongated handprints outside Margaret's house, the claw marks inside, the piles of small bones arranged with method. One photo always caught him off guard. The last shot he'd taken as he scrambled out of the crawl space. Something had been behind him, suspended just out of reach. Pale, long-limbed, eyes reflecting his flashlight, perched like a predator in the floorboards above. That single frame crystallized everything. The thing didn't sleep. It didn't leave. It had chosen that space for itself, and it would remain there, hiding, waiting. Bridge Hollow itself remained, unchanged. The houses still hugged the old railroad bridge. Only one remained occupied. County records didn't note anything unusual, didn't record missing persons or mysterious sounds. But Harry knew better. He knew what crawled below. He'd seen it. And sometimes, driving past on remote roads, he swore he caught glimpses of movement beneath the bridge. A shadow slipping along the underbelly with those impossible, jointed limbs. Every time he did, his chest tightened, a cold sweat forming along his spine. He remembered Margaret's face,
The fear, the resignation. She hadn't lied. That thing lived there. Still does. Waiting. Watching. Learning. Harry's life became quieter, more cautious. He never returned to the hollow. He never ventured down those roads at night. The photograph stayed locked, a grim reminder of what lurked just beneath the surface of the everyday world, a place humanity pretends doesn't exist. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right and the trees groan like old bones, he can almost hear the scraping of claws, rhythmic and patient, somewhere beneath the old bridge, in the hidden network of crawl spaces that connect the 6 houses. And he knows it's still there, waiting, always waiting. Arthur was 33, a private eye who lived for missing person cases. It was in that line of work he first caught the pattern. 7 hikers gone in 18 months, all within 20 miles of each other, in a remote slice of eastern Tennessee. It wasn't just the vanishings that set off alarm bells. It was the social media trail. Each hiker had posted photos in the days before they disappeared, and several pictures all pointed to the same place. A cul-de-sac in the middle of nowhere. Perfectly circular, hugged by forest, with neat little houses in a flawless ring and mountains framing the horizon. Pictures any hiker would drool over. Sunlight glinting off the asphalt, fall leaves scattered around. Everyone commenting, everyone asking where it was. None of the missing ever answered. Arthur had been hired by the family of the latest victim, Emily Stroud, 26, who had gone alone into Cherokee National Forest and never come back. Her car sat abandoned at a trailhead, backpack still in the trunk, phone dead. 5 days of search and rescue had been called off after storms rolled in, terrain too massive, too wild. Her parents refused to accept lost. They wanted answers. They wanted Arthur. He started by digging through Emily's social media, her hiking logs, her photos. That's when he spotted it. The cul-de-sac, posted 3 days before she vanished. Caption read, "Found the weirdest neighborhood in the middle of nowhere. How does this even exist?" Arthur went down the rabbit hole, cross-referencing old missing person cases, tracking social media through family contacts and law enforcement. 5 more photos of the same circular neighborhood appeared, taken by different hikers over 2 years. Same houses, same loop, same mountain backdrop. Beautiful, unreachable, and impossible. He couldn't locate the cul-de-sac on any map. Hours passed comparing satellite images, hunting the circle of the road, the layout of the homes. Nothing. Reverse image searches, calls to local realtors, county planning offices. Nobody knew anything. Then came a call from Dale Hutchkins, an old park ranger. 42 years in Cherokee National Forest before retirement. Heard through law enforcement channels that someone was poking around developments in the forest. Dale remembered something from the late 70s. A developer, Clayton Veer, had managed to get permits for a small community right on Forest Service land. He exploited a loophole in pre-existing mineral rights. 8 houses and a cul-de-sac, paved roads, utilities, all meant as luxury retreats. But the law caught up. Permits revoked, orders to demolish. Veer fought for years, but in the end, the case vanished quietly. Supposedly, everything was torn down. Dale couldn't remember the exact location, but he had old topo maps in the garage. Arthur drove 3 hours to Dale's place, digging through boxes of yellowed maps, faded photos, brittle folders. And then, there it was. A 1979 map, tiny notation. Veer Development Project. Coordinates about 12 miles down a long abandoned Forest Service road. Dale warned the road might not even exist. Logging tracks had been blocked or overgrown since the operations ended. But coordinates were enough. 2 days later, Arthur set out. Truck loaded with hiking gear, food, water for 3 days. The forest road was barely a suggestion, a scrape of gravel and mud through thick trees. 8 miles in, fallen trees and washouts ended the drive. On foot now, GPS in hand. Silence wrapped him tight. No birds, no wind, no life. Hours trudging through deep green, flagging tape marking the trail, before the trees thinned and the clearing appeared. The cul-de-sac. 8 houses in a perfect circle. Asphalt cracked but visible under leaves and pine needles. Houses weathered but intact. No collapse, no rotted roofs. Windows mostly whole, shingles holding. The place should have been a ghost of rubble by now. Then the cars. Modern, mismatched, parked like no one had left them in a hurry, but like no one planned to return either. A sedan 10 years old, an SUV just 2 or 3. Plates from different states. Arthur approached the nearest, a blue Honda Civic, Tennessee plates. Doors unlocked, keys in ignition, backpack on the passenger seat, charger dangling. He checked the glove compartment. Registration for Marcus Chen, missing 8 months prior. He moved to the next, a North Carolina pickup. Same story. Sarah Kimmel, missing 6 months. Every vehicle in the cul-de-sac belonged to someone who had vanished. Cars perfectly positioned, owners nowhere. He photographed each, documenting plates, registrations, personal items. Everything looked like a day trip gone wrong, but nothing explained the people themselves. Arthur called out into the clearing. "Is anyone here? I'm Arthur, private investigator. If you can hear me, respond." Only silence. He began inspecting the houses, starting with the one featured in Emily Stroud's photos. Front door unlocked, swinging when he nudged it. Inside, clean, empty, sterile. Polished hardwood floors, painted white walls, no furniture, no debris, no decay. Kitchen sink ran water. Impossible. These houses were abandoned decades ago. Lights flicked on with switches, bright, modern LEDs. Cold crawled over him. He killed the lights, exited. All houses identical. Empty shells, perfectly maintained, utilities working without explanation. The forest around the clearing was silent. No wind, no birds, no insects. Heavy, unnatural stillness. Phone no signal, expected, but time wrong. Phone said 3:47 p.m. His watch said 1 p.m. Hours slipping where none should exist. Then he heard it. Faint, distant. Children laughing, playing somewhere in the forest. Turned toward the sound, volume constant, never approaching, never receding. A loop, wrong, inhuman. Arthur stepped into the forest, following the laughter, GPS in hand. Trees closed in fast. In 20 paces, he couldn't see the cul-de-sac. Compass pointed north. 30 minutes of walking, still deep forest. No hint of clearing. He tried returning, forest identical from all angles. GPS marker alone in a sea of green. No landmarks. Then he found the clearing again. Different angle, same houses, same cars, same impossibly pristine cul-de-sac. Every attempt ended the same. Arthur tried 3 more exits, each time trusting his compass, each time walking straight as he could. Every attempt landed him back at the same clearing, the same cul-de-sac, the same 8 houses. The forest didn't lead anywhere. It looped, or worse, trapped. The children's laughter echoed endlessly, the same loop, taunting him from the shadows. The sun was slipping toward the horizon, gold bleeding into the trees. Arthur knew he had no choice. He couldn't spend the night out in the forest with that sound looping, chilling him to the bone. He picked the house closest to Emily Stroud's car. Inside, he dumped his pack and set up a small camping stove in the kitchen. Lights worked. Water flowed. All the utilities were running. How? He had no clue. The normal rules didn't seem to apply here. He tried his phone, of course. No signal. His watch and phone displayed different times. His watch said 8 p.m. His phone insisted it was nearly 2 a.m. the next day. Hours slipped in impossible ways. The cul-de-sac had its own timeline. Arthur stayed awake all night, back against the wall in the empty living room, knife and flashlight within reach. Silence inside the house, laughter still playing from the woods outside. Time crawled. He didn't sleep. Couldn't. Then he heard it. Steps on asphalt. Many of them. Circling the cul-de-sac. Whispered voices too low to understand. His pulse hammered. He moved to a window, peered out into darkness. Nothing visible, but the sounds persisted, circling, unending. The whispers, the steps, continued until light cracked the horizon, and the forest exhaled into normalcy. First light. Arthur tried leaving again, and for reasons he would never understand, the forest let him. He followed north as his compass instructed. 20 minutes later, he stumbled onto the old logging road, truck exactly where he'd left it, dew covering the hood, birds singing, normal physics restored. His watch read 6:30 a.m. Phone read 4:15 p.m. Nearly 36 hours lost in a place where he'd spent just one night. His head spun, mind struggling to reconcile the impossible. Arthur reported everything to law enforcement. GPS coordinates, photos of the cars, documentation of every detail he'd discovered. A search team came 3 days later. Nothing. No cul-de-sac, no houses, no cars. GPS coordinates led only to dense forest. No trail, no signs of human activity. His photographs were dismissed as fakes. He was quietly warned to stop wasting police time. Emily Stroud's family thanked him for trying, but didn't renew his contract. The other 6 hikers remained missing. Arthur knew the truth. The cul-de-sac was no ordinary place. It existed outside rules, outside maps, waiting for the next person to stumble across it. One who would see it in a photograph, think it was a hidden gem, and chase it into its loop. Once inside, there was no leaving. He never spoke of it openly, not to colleagues, not to friends. The cul-de-sac didn't exist in any official sense, and the forest could swallow any evidence. But he kept his notes, the photos, the records. They were proof enough for him. Proof of something impossible. And in the silence of his apartment at night, he sometimes heard it. The distant, looping laughter of children, impossibly close and impossibly far. A reminder. The cul-de-sac waits. It always waits. And anyone who seeks it, anyone who finds it, walks right into the impossible. Jacob was 27, grinding through freelance urban planning gigs, when he got called to survey Orchard Lane. The neighborhood was a scrappy row of 50s-era houses, tucked on the edge of a small Appalachian town in southwestern Virginia. Most of the homes were falling apart, left to rot as families scattered for jobs in bigger cities. Only a couple of properties seemed occupied, though they looked as drained as the residents inside, yards overrun, paint peeling like skin from a burned wall. The company hiring him wanted a rundown on which houses could be saved, which needed to be torn down. The kicker? Every house sat above a massive storm drain tunnel that ran the length of the street, big enough to walk through standing upright. They'd long been sealed off after years of complaints, strange noises, worries about safety. But the access points still existed in basements and crawl spaces.
Jacob rolled up Thursday morning in a gray sky, parking at the top where the asphalt was still smooth. Methodical was his mode. Start at one end, snap pictures of exteriors, log foundation cracks, roof damage, water stains. The first few houses were dull. Empty basements, stripped interiors, damp and lifeless. Then he found the first note. Fourth house, tucked in the attic window frame, yellowed and brittle. Faded blue ink, shaky handwriting, almost childlike. They talk through the drains at night, voices coming up from the tunnel. Sarah says she knows who they are, but will not tell me. I hear them calling my name. Unsigned, undated. Jacob snapped a photo, filed it under weird stuff from old residents, assuming some lonely or unwell soul left it behind. The sixth house basement gave him the second note, taped inside a cabinet door near the old sealed storm drain access. This handwriting was neater, but the message chilled him. The children will not stop drawing on the walls down there. I can hear the chalk scraping even though I sealed the entrance. How are they getting in? How long have they been down there? He shined his flashlight over the concrete, looking for signs. The seal looked untouched. Thin scratches lined the surface. Fingernails? Rodents? Couldn't tell. By the ninth house, one of the two still lived-in spots, he'd found 6 more notes. Each spoke of the tunnel, voices, and children, sometimes heard, sometimes glimpsed near access points. One, scribbled on a grocery receipt from 2008, read, "Police came today, told them about the sounds. They said the tunnel's been empty for 30 years, but I know what I heard. They are still down there." Jacob knocked on the door of the occupied house, hoping for a human face, some explanation. An old woman answered, wary eyes under deeply lined skin. He explained his survey, showed credentials. She didn't flinch, just said, "You found the notes." Not a question. He confirmed he had, and she nodded. Told him there used to be an entrance hidden between 2 abandoned homes, overgrown, accessed through a rusted maintenance hatch. That was it. Don't go down after dark. Jacob found the hatch under a tangle of leaves and vines. Clearing it took 20 minutes, another 10 with a crowbar, prying open rusted metal. The ladder was slick, descending into total darkness. Flashlight on, he peered 15 feet down. Concrete walls, floor slick with damp. Every instinct screamed, "Don't," but he climbed. Inside, the tunnel matched records. Roughly 8 feet tall, 6 wide. Condensation dripped, mold thick in the corners. Footsteps echoed like the space stretched further than it should. He moved carefully, flashlight slicing through the black. That's when he saw them, the drawings. Chalk figures scattered over walls, bright despite decades of damp. Stick figures holding hands, houses with smiling suns, trees, flowers. Eyes too big, staring. Layers of past children's imagination stacked on top of each other. Chilling wasn't the art, it was the impossible timing. The tunnel had been sealed for 30 years. No one could have been down here. Yet the lines were fresh, crisp. He pressed on, following the tunnel beneath each house, noting blocked access points. Concrete, welded metal plates. Near the 7th house, something froze him. A small pile of children's shoes, neat, 6 pairs, toddler to 10-year-old sizes. Old styles, but pristine. Beside them, chalk letters. "We are still here." Jacob's pulse jumped. He backed up. His instinct, get out, call police. But flashlight caught movement. Fresh chalk dust on the floor. Tiny footprints, toes clear, leading further into darkness.
Hello? His voice cracked, echoed back, distorted, layered, then resolved into one word, dozens of children speaking together. Yes. Panic took him. He ran, flashlight swinging, heart hammering. Behind, quick, light footsteps. Laughter, playful yet wrong, bouncing off concrete walls, coming from everywhere and nowhere. He hauled himself up the ladder, daylight hitting his face. Slammed hatch shut. Through metal, muffled laughter, persistent. Beneath it, faint scrape of chalk on concrete. He dialed police, hands trembling. Explained the tunnel, shoes, drawings, possibility of trapped children. Officers arrived within the hour, fire rescue team behind them with lights, ropes, safety gear. They went down. 40 minutes later, they came up. Photographs of old drawings, all faded and crumbling. Sealed access points documented. No shoes, no footprints, no chalk dust. Lead officer showed him the photos, everything old, deteriorated. Jacob insisted he'd seen it fresh, had pictures to prove it. Yet his images showed only the faded remnants, just as police documented. Report filed. Historical graffiti, structural concerns, no evidence of recent habitation. He submitted his survey, recommended demolition, included notes but left out what he'd actually witnessed. Professional credibility at stake. 6 months later, demolition crews tore down the houses. Tunnel filled with concrete. Jacob tried to forget, but then came the envelope. No return address. Inside, a photograph he hadn't taken. Tunnel interior. Same section with the shoes. Figures barely visible in darkness beyond flashlight's reach. Children, holding hands, staring at the camera. Back of photo. Can you tell them we are still here? Jacob locked it away. Never showed anyone. Told himself it was a prank. Yet some nights, in silence, he hears it. Chalk scraping concrete. And he knows, whatever the children wanted to say, he didn't listen. Jacob couldn't shake the memory. Even weeks later, the tunnel haunted him. He avoided thinking about it during the day, but at night, when the apartment was quiet and the hum of the city faded, the chalk scraping crept back in his mind. He replayed the tiny footprints, the shoes, the way the laughter twisted into something wrong, something not just playful, but deliberate. He tried to tell himself it was over. The neighborhood was gone, the tunnel was sealed. No kids, no echoes, no trace. And yet, that photograph, the one he'd received in the mail, low-angle shot, almost as if someone had been crouched on the wet concrete floor. Figures standing in a group, holding hands, faces turned toward the lens. And the words written on the back. Can you tell them we are still here? Jacob didn't sleep well after that. Every sound in his apartment, the squeak of the radiator, the hum of his fridge, made him flinch. Every shadow seemed to twitch. Every glance at the locked drawer where the photo lay pressed a cold finger against his chest. It was a whisper he couldn't ignore, a presence that didn't belong in the daylight world. He told himself he could move on. He kept working, checked off surveys, crunched numbers, drew up reports. Professional, methodical. But at night, his dreams betrayed him. He was back in the tunnel, the walls glistening with moisture. Footsteps behind him, light, fast, circling. Chalk dust puffing with each movement, leaving trails of pastel evidence in impossible patterns. The laughter, it wasn't teasing, it wasn't childlike, it was claiming. One evening, Jacob returned to the office late, exhausted from meetings and site visits. The building was empty, the overhead lights flickering as he passed through the corridor. When he reached his office door, something small and solid hit the floor at his feet. He froze, heart hammering. It was a shoe. tiny, toddler-sized, scuffed but clean, as if it had been worn yesterday. Not his imagination, not a leftover from a client visit, just there. He bent down, hands shaking, picked it up. No note, no explanation, just the shoe. Jacob backed away slowly, turned off the lights, and locked the door behind him. On the way home, he drove faster than was safe, constantly checking the rearview mirror. Shadows flickered in the periphery of his vision. Every intersection looked familiar, as if he'd been chased down these streets before. At his apartment, he put the shoe in the locked drawer with the photograph, triple-locked it. But he didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed, flashlight in hand, listening, waiting. The faintest scrape on concrete, just at the edge of perception. And every so often, the whisper of a small, insistent voice. "We're still here." Days bled into nights. Jacob avoided work that required him to be alone. He stopped going into basements, crawl spaces, anywhere he might encounter the echoes of the tunnel. The letters and drawings, the shoes, these weren't random remnants of history. They were markers, evidence of something that still existed somewhere beneath the town. Eventually, he began scanning old municipal plans, digging through archives, trying to find records of other sealed tunnels or forgotten passages. Every lead was a dead end. Every search made him feel smaller, like the city itself was shrinking, walls closing in, corridors twisting in ways no map could account for. One night, weeks after the envelope arrived, Jacob woke to scratching at his apartment door. Slow, deliberate, metallic on wood. His stomach dropped. He grabbed the flashlight again, swung it toward the door. Nothing. Only the dull shadow of the peephole staring back. He checked the window. Empty fire escape. Empty street. But on the floor, chalk dust. Pink, blue, yellow. Footprints leading from the doorway into the center of the room. Jacob didn't wait. He grabbed the photograph, the shoe, and drove. He didn't stop until city lights stretched endlessly in front of him, the noise of traffic drowning out the quiet horrors of Orchard Lane. He told himself he was leaving it behind, that the tunnel, the children, the voices, they belonged to the past, to a place that no longer existed. And yet, even in the chaos of the city, he could feel it. The faint scrape of chalk, the shadow at the edge of perception, the impossibly sharp stare of wide eyes beneath a sun-drawn sky. Every night he lay awake, imagining the tunnel beneath the houses he'd surveyed, imagining the small shoes neatly arranged against cold concrete walls, imagining the block letters scrawled across the damp. "We are still here." Jacob told himself he was safe. He wasn't. Orchard Lane wasn't gone. The tunnel wasn't sealed. And the children, whatever they were still waiting, patient, watching, marking their territory with chalk that would never fade, voices that would never be silent, toys that would never rot. He keeps the photograph in a locked drawer, but sometimes, just at the edge of hearing, the faint scrape of chalk returns. A whisper of tiny voices, repeating the same thing over and over. "We're still here. We're still here. We're still here." No one else knows. No one else believes. But Jacob knows the truth. He had walked into the tunnel once, alone, and glimpsed what should not exist. And now, every time he thinks the world is safe, every time he convinces himself the children are gone, he feels the chalk beneath his feet, hears the laughter in the walls, and remembers that the past is never finished. Orchard Lane is gone, the houses demolished, the tunnel filled with concrete. But some things do not obey rules. Some things linger in the damp, in the shadows, in the faint whisper of pastel on concrete. Jacob will never return. He tells himself he won't, but he cannot forget. And some nights, when the world is quiet and dark, he hears the faintest scraping sound echoing in his mind. Chalk on concrete, tiny footsteps, voices whispering, "We're still here." And he knows, deep down, they always will be. Harper was 30 when she finally settled into the rundown rental at the far end of Miller Ridge Road, a thread of cracked asphalt that clawed up the side of a West Virginia mountain and then just stopped, swallowed by trees. It was last-minute luck, cheap enough to fit her messy finances, flexible enough to handle her freelance grind. The landlord had been almost too eager to seal the deal, brushing off her questions with a tight grin and some nonsense about quiet folks up the ridge, keep to themselves. The first thing Harper noticed was the windows. Every other house along the dead end had blinds nailed shut from the inside. Not just drawn, not just closed, nailed. Thin silver heads glinting in the sun like tiny eyes. A few had plywood over them too, though AC units rattled inside, blowing stale, trapped air into rooms that refused to look out at the world. Her own place? Curtains wide open. Sun spilling in, no barriers, no shadowed secrets. Inside, the place was better than she'd hoped. Old, sure, but clean. Floors uneven, hardwood that had survived decades. Kitchen cabinets painted a cheerful yellow back in the late 70s, left untouched since. Back door led to a narrow yard that bled straight into the forest, the trees brushing the siding on windy days. No fence, no line marking yard from woods. It wasn't a backyard. It was the edge of something that didn't like boundaries. First night passed quietly. Boxes unpacked, cheap takeout eaten, bed set up. She fell asleep to the fridge humming and the faint buzz of a TV from somewhere down the ridge. Then the second night came. The shovels started. At first, she chalked it up to late-night yard work. A scrape, scrape, thump, metal hitting packed earth, then tossed aside. She checked her phone. 2:13 a.m. The sound came from the woods, not the road. She killed the bedroom light, peered through the curtains. Moonlight hit the neighboring roofs and the tree line, but no one was there. No flashlights, no movement. Just that scrape, thump, scrape, thump. And then, faint sobbing, muffled, desperate, as if someone was holding it back. The noise vanished exactly at 2:30 a.m., like someone had flipped a switch. The silence that followed was so complete Harper's ears rang. She lay awake until dawn, convincing herself it was her imagination, raccoons, something boring. By daylight, fear thinned. Work awaited, deadlines loomed. She shoved the memory down. Third night, it returned. 2:13 a.m., like clockwork. Scrape, thump, scrape, thump. Closer now. Or maybe she was just more aware. Harper crept to the kitchen, cracked the back door, let in a slice of cold night air. The sounds sharpened, layers overlapping. Multiple shovels, multiple hands. Voices whispered low, urgent, but words slipped past her. And at 2:30, silence again. By the fourth day, Harper started counting houses down the ridge. 6 total, hers included. 2 abandoned, yards choked with weeds, porches sagging. 4 signs of life. A truck here, smoke curling from a chimney there, a dog barking inside somewhere. Yet no one outside. No garden tending, no porch sitting, no kids. Windows nailed shut as she passed. The place had life, but refused to show it. She circled behind her house, pretending to inspect siding in case anyone watched. Ground untouched. Leaves, sticks, dirt, normal mountain debris. No fresh piles, no new holes. Whoever was digging was meticulous, careful. Harper knew the rhythm of hidden things. Illegal dumps, old stills, maybe worse. But this wasn't random. There was order, coordination. Multiple shovels striking in near-perfect sync, stopping at the exact same time. Fifth night, she prepped. Alarm set for 2:05 a.m., clothes on, shoes ready. When 2:13 hit, digging started again, closer. Harper exhaled, stepped onto the back stoop. Cold air puffing her breath, flashlight off so her eyes could adjust to the pale moonlight. Sounds came from slightly uphill, behind the row of houses. She moved quietly, low, sneakers loud in her own ears on wet leaves. Crawled the last stretch, hugging tree trunks, scraping and thudding clearer. Sobbing returned, now not alone. Two voices, maybe more, choked and frantic beneath the shovel rhythm. Harper reached a rise, peered over. A clearing. 6 shallow pits lined in uneven rows. Figures with shovels, faces hidden by hats and hoods. They moved in near silence. Scrape, grunt, scrape, grunt. The sobbing came from one pit. Words tumbled out. "Please, I'm sorry. I will leave. I will." Then a shovel struck rock, voice cut off. Digger cursed softly, adjusted stance. Harper's hand shook so badly she almost dropped the flashlight. The figures dressed to be anonymous, interchangeable shadows. At 2:29 a.m., one glanced at a watch, gave a low whistle. Every shovel froze. Sobbing cut instantly, as if hands clamped over mouths. One figure climbed from a pit, then disappeared into the woods. Others fanned toward housebacks, silent, emptying the clearing. 6 raw holes under moonlight. 2:30 a.m. Silence again. Harper didn't sleep. Locked doors, dragged a chair under the back knob, sat at the kitchen table with a knife and cold coffee. Every creak, every rare car set her nerves tight. Was she seen? Did one of those faceless diggers glance up, spot her? Morning came but didn't bring relief. Harper drove down the ridge, tried to shake the dread, but the memory of those shovels, the muffled sobs, and the pits dug into her mind like roots. She had to know more, had to find some proof. County Records Office smelled of old paper and toner, and the clerk behind the counter seemed to know everyone and everything in the valley. Harper acted casual, curious about her new home. Property records for the far end of Miller Ridge Road printed out in a thick stack. Back at her apartment, Harper spread them on the table. Patterns jumped out at her. Over 40 years, the last 4 houses had changed hands constantly. Some owners lasted months, some never officially sold at all. Names vanished, replaced by estates, LLCs, transfers to distant relatives who dissolved within the year. Buried in the mess of paperwork was a short note. Sheriff's investigation, late 80s. Missing people, plural. Closed, no foul play found. Tiny scrawls, almost dismissive. Harper felt a chill crawl her spine. That night, she swore she wouldn't go back. Until 2:13 a.m., when the rhythm started again. The guilt weighed on her chest all day. Someone pleading in a pit. Someone begging to be let go. She thought about her car, just weeks old on that ridge, her boxes waiting to be unpacked. Could it have been her voice echoing in that clearing? Could it have been her body fighting to escape? 4 minutes later, she was at the back door, flashlight in hand. This time she stayed behind the first line of trees, farther up the slope, heart hammering. Pits deeper now,
fresh dirt in neat piles. 4 diggers, fewer than last night, but the rhythm was intact. Sobbing louder. Male this time, older, raw with disbelief. "You people are insane. Do you know who I am? My brother will—" Shovel slammed, voice cut. Harper backed away, then ran. Past her house, past everything. She grabbed keys, wallet, and tore down Miller Ridge Road, narrow mountain lane swallowing her tires. Ignored speed limits, reckless. Didn't stop until a 24-hour gas station 40 miles away. Never looked back. Never returned. Landlord called 2 days later, angry voicemail. Harper deleted it. When he called again, calmer, mentioned someone else already interested in the place. She blocked the number. Months later, curiosity gnawed. She scoured the web for Miller Ridge Road. Almost nothing. A listing, no photos. A 30-year-old news story about an unlawful burial site near the community. No charges filed. Message boards with whispers of people moving up the ridge, then vanishing. City life followed. Flats, lights, cameras, and noise. The worst things happened in plain sight, under eyes, under streetlights. Yet some nights, when the hum of traffic faded, Harper swore she heard it. At the edge of perception, under the noise of her new life. Scrape. Thump. Scrape. Thump. And in her mind, the dead-end houses, blinds nailed shut, waiting, watching, silent. Whoever rented there, paid their rent, never questioned why. No one looked out. No one ever did. The memory of those faceless diggers, the synchronized shovels, the pleading voices, it never left. It threaded through her dreams and lingered in every shadow at the edge of the city. The mountain, the pits, the rhythm of the work, they were still there somewhere, waiting for the next person foolish enough to listen, to follow the sound, to walk the ridge and find the things that should not exist. Harper never went back, never unpacked her boxes, never stepped foot on Miller Ridge Road again. But every time she closed her eyes, she could see the slope, the holes, the men working in silence, and hear the sobbing carried on the cold night air. Even decades later, the memory had weight. Scrape, thump, scrape, thump. Like a heartbeat she couldn't stop. Like a warning. The houses at the ridge waited in silence, their blinds nailed tight, knowing someone would eventually look, someone would eventually answer, and the mountain would claim them too.